Steve Harvey has heard thousands of stories on Family Feud. He's laughed at absurd answers, comforted nervous contestants, and handled every situation with grace. But when a 23-year-old mother stepped onto his stage holding a 6-month-old baby and told him, "She died in my arms and came back," Steve Harvey did something unprecedented. He walked off camera, sat down on the stage floor, and asked her to tell him everything. What followed wasn't a game show. It was a moment that made millions believe in the impossible. It was Thursday, October 19th, 2023, at the Family Feud studios in Atlanta, Georgia. The morning had started like any other taping day. Coffee brewing in the green room, production assistants rushing with clipboards, audience members filing into their seats with that excited energy that comes from being part of live television. Steve Harvey arrived in his signature sharp suit, royal blue this time, with a pocket square that matched perfectly, ready to deliver the charm and humor that had made him America's favorite game show host. The Rodriguez family from Phoenix, Arizona was scheduled for the 10 a.m. slot. They'd driven 16 hours straight to get there, cramming into a minivan with luggage, hope, and a 6-month-old baby named Isabella who barely cried the entire trip. Maya Rodriguez, 23 years old with dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, held her daughter against her chest in the green room while her parents, grandmother, and younger brother prepared for their moment on national television. But Maya seemed distant. While her family laughed and practiced buzzer timing, she sat quietly in the corner, rocking Isabella gently, whispering something into the baby's tiny ear that no one else could hear. Her mother, Carmen, noticed but said nothing. Some things are too heavy to discuss before walking onto a stage in front of millions of people. The production assistant called their names. "Rodriguez family, you're up in 5 minutes." Maya's father, Roberto, a construction worker with weathered hands and a broad smile, clapped his hands together. "This is it, mija, our moment." But when he looked at his daughter, he saw tears forming in her eyes. Not the happy kind, the kind that carry weight. "I don't know if I can do this, Papa," Maya whispered. "You can," Carmen said firmly, placing her hand on her daughter's shoulder. "You need to. She needs you to." Isabella gurgled softly, her tiny fingers wrapping around Maya's thumb. Those fingers that had once turned blue. Those fingers that had once gone limp and cold. Those fingers that, according to every medical textbook and every experienced doctor in that Phoenix hospital, should never have moved again. The studio doors opened. The Rodriguez family walked onto the Family Feud stage to thunderous applause, the iconic theme song pumping through the speakers, lights bright and warm. Steve Harvey greeted them with his trademark energy, shaking hands, making jokes, immediately putting them at ease the way only he could. "Now, Rodriguez family from Phoenix," Steve announced. "Give it up for them." The audience roared. "We got Roberto, Carmen, grandmother Elena, brother Daniel, and—" Steve stopped when he saw Maya holding Isabella. His entire demeanor shifted slightly, the way it always did when babies were involved. He became softer, more gentle. "And who is this beautiful little one?" Steve asked, stepping closer. "This is Isabella," Maya said quietly. "She's 6 months old." 6 months? Steve leaned in, making a silly face at the baby. Isabella stared at him with those enormous brown eyes that seemed far too aware for an infant. "She's gorgeous. Look at those eyes. She's looking right through me like she knows something I don't." The audience laughed. Steve turned to the camera. "Y'all see this? This baby's judging me right now." More laughter. But something was different. Steve, who had interviewed thousands of contestants and could read people like a book, sensed something beneath the surface. Maya's smile didn't reach her eyes. Her grip on Isabella was protective in a way that went beyond normal maternal instinct. It was the grip of someone who had almost lost something and would never let go again. Steve decided to do what he always did when he sensed a story. He asked a simple question. The kind of question that usually gets a simple answer. The kind of question that, on October 19th, 2023, would stop a game show in its tracks and change everyone in that studio forever. "So, Maya, Beautiful baby girl, what's the best thing that ever happened to you?" Maya looked down at Isabella. Then she looked up at Steve Harvey, and she said, with a voice that was barely above a whisper, but somehow carried through every speaker in that studio, "This moment, right now, because she wasn't supposed to be alive." The audience went silent. Not the brief pause before laughter, but the deep, suffocating silence of confusion mixed with dawning horror. Steve's smile froze on his face. His hand, which had been gesturing animatedly, stopped mid-air. "What do you mean she wasn't supposed to be alive?" Steve asked carefully. Maya's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't look away. "She died in my arms, Steve, 6 months ago. For 11 minutes. Her heart stopped beating, she wasn't breathing, the doctors told me she was gone. But then she came back."
The studio went from silent to paralyzed. You could hear the cameras moving, the slight rustle of clothing as audience members leaned forward, the sharp intake of breath from Maya's mother standing beside her. Steve Harvey stood completely still. He looked at Isabella, this perfect, healthy baby staring back at him with curious eyes. He looked at Maya, this young mother whose face carried a grief that no 23-year-old should know. And he did something that in 17 years of hosting Family Feud he had never done. He took off his microphone, handed it to a producer, and walked away from his mark. Not off the stage, but to the side, where he sat down on the floor, legs crossed, looking up at Maya like a student ready to learn. "Come here," Steve said softly, gesturing to the floor beside him. "Bring her. Sit with me." The producers panicked. This wasn't in the script. The other family stood awkwardly at their podium. The audience didn't know whether to stay quiet or react. But something about Steve's stillness, his sincerity, his complete abandonment of the game show format told everyone that what was about to happen was more important than any prize money or television schedule. Maya, holding Isabella close, walked over and sat down on the stage floor facing Steve Harvey. The cameras repositioned frantically, the lighting crew adjusted, and America, though they wouldn't see this for another 3 weeks when it aired, was about to witness something that transcended entertainment. "Tell me everything," Steve said quietly. "Start from the beginning." Maya took a shaky breath. Isabella reached out and grabbed her mother's finger, and that small gesture, that proof of life, seemed to give Maya the strength to speak. "It was April 19th, 2023, 4 in the morning. I woke up to feed her, and she was—" Her voice cracked. "She was so cold, Steve. Babies are supposed to be warm, but she was cold." The audience was openly crying now. Steve's eyes glistened, but he stayed focused on Maya, giving her space to tell her truth. "I screamed. My mom came running. We called 911. The operator talked me through CPR, but her lips were turning blue and she wasn't responding. The ambulance came. It felt like hours, but it was only 6 minutes, and they worked on her the entire ride to Phoenix Children's Hospital." Maya stopped, composing herself. Isabella cooed softly, completely oblivious to the story being told about her own death. "When we got to the ER, they took her from me. I could see them through the window, doctors, nurses, maybe 10 people surrounding this tiny baby. They were doing chest compressions. They tried shocking her little heart 3 times. Maya's voice dropped to barely a whisper. "And then I saw them stop." Steve leaned forward, his hand reaching out to support Maya's shoulder. "A doctor came out. Her name was Dr. Sarah Chen. I'll never forget her face. She looked exhausted and broken. She said, 'I'm so sorry. We did everything we could. She's been without oxygen for 11 minutes. Even if we brought her back now, the brain damage would be catastrophic. She's gone.'" The silence in that studio was the heaviest thing anyone had ever felt. Grown men in the audience were sobbing. Maya's family stood frozen, reliving their worst day. My mom collapsed. My dad was screaming at them to keep trying, but I just went numb. They brought me into the room to say goodbye. They placed her in my arms, and she was still warm from all their efforts to save her, but she wasn't breathing. Her heart wasn't beating. They'd already stopped the machines. Steve Harvey's face was a portrait of grief. This man who made millions laugh, who spread joy for a living, sat on that stage floor crying openly for a mother and child he'd met 15 minutes ago. I held her, Maya continued, and I talked to her. I told her about all the things we were supposed to do together. First steps, first words, teaching her to ride a bike, watching her go to prom. I told her I was sorry I couldn't protect her from whatever took her away. I told her I loved her more than anything in this world. Then Maya looked directly into Steve's eyes. And then I felt it. Felt what? Steve asked, his voice barely functioning. A breath. The entire studio gasped collectively. Steve's hand flew to his mouth. At first, I thought I imagined it, Maya said, her tears now flowing freely. But then I felt another one, small, weak, but a breath, and I started screaming. The nurses came running. Dr. Chen ran in and she looked at the monitor that they'd turned off, except someone had forgotten to actually unplug it, and it showed a heartbeat. Jesus, Steve whispered. It wasn't strong. It was irregular, but it was there. They couldn't believe it. They took her from me again, rushed her to the NICU, did every scan imaginable. They were certain there would be massive brain damage. No one survives 11 minutes without oxygen and comes back normal. No one. Maya looked down at Isabella, who was now chewing on her own tiny fist, making those adorable baby sounds that make the whole world smile. But she did, Steve said, finishing the thought. She did, Maya confirmed. Every test came back normal. Perfect, actually. Her brain function, her motor skills, her cognitive development, everything. The doctors called it impossible. They called it a statistical anomaly. They used every scientific term they could find to explain what happened. But you know what it was, Steve said. It wasn't a question. A miracle, Maya said firmly. I held my dead daughter in my arms, and God gave her back to me. Steve Harvey stood up slowly, reaching down to help Maya to her feet. He took Isabella from her arms, a gesture so tender it made everyone cry harder, and held the baby close to his chest. Isabella immediately grabbed his collar, completely content in the arms of a stranger. This is Isabella Rodriguez, Steve addressed, turning to address the entire studio. His voice was thick with emotion, but carried the weight of authority. 6 months ago, she was pronounced dead. 11 minutes without a heartbeat, 11 minutes without oxygen. Medical science says that's impossible to recover from. Every doctor said she wouldn't make it, and if by some chance she did, she'd never be normal. He held Isabella up slightly, showing her to the audience. And here she is, perfect, healthy, alive, looking at me like I'm the weird one for crying. The audience erupted in applause that lasted nearly 2 minutes. Maya was sobbing into her mother's shoulder. Roberto had his arm around his daughter, tears streaming down his weathered face. Even the opposing family was crying, completely invested in this story that had nothing to do with competition anymore. But Steve wasn't finished. I've been hosting this show for 17 years, Steve said, his voice gaining strength. I've met incredible people. I've heard amazing stories. I've seen humanity at its best and occasionally at its worst. But I have never, he emphasized the word never, encountered something like this. He looked at Isabella, then at the camera. This baby is proof. Proof that there are things in this universe that science can't explain. Proof that miracles are real. Proof that sometimes, even when every logical fact says it's over, hope has the final word. Steve walked back to Maya and gently placed Isabella in her arms. You didn't just bring your family to Family Feud today. You brought testimony, and millions of people watching this right now needed to hear it. He turned to the production team. Stop the clock. I don't care about the game. This moment is bigger than the game.
Then Steve did something that would be replayed millions of times across every platform. He got down on one knee in front of Maya and Isabella, looked up at them, and said, "Would you let me pray for you both?" Maya, unable to speak through her tears, nodded. Right there, on the Family Feud stage, Steve Harvey bowed his head and prayed. The entire studio joined him, audience members, crew, even the opposing family. It wasn't planned, it wasn't scripted, it was just a moment of pure, unfiltered humanity transcending the boundaries of entertainment. "Heavenly Father," Steve began, his voice steady now with purpose, "we thank you for Isabella. We thank you for not listening to the doctors who said it was over. We thank you for not following the statistics that said she couldn't survive. We thank you for being bigger than our understanding and more powerful than our science. We thank you for giving Maya her daughter back and for using this moment to remind all of us that miracles still happen." The prayer lasted 3 minutes. When Steve said amen, the entire studio echoed it. What happened next was unprecedented in game show history. Steve stood up, wiped his eyes, and addressed both families. "We're going to cancel this competition. Both families are going to receive the $20,000. And Maya, your family is getting an additional $30,000 because Isabella's story needs to be told, and you need to be supported as you raise this miracle child." The audience erupted. Maya collapsed into Steve's arms, sobbing so hard her entire body shook. Steve held her, this young mother who'd experienced both the deepest grief and the greatest joy a human can know, and just let her cry. When the episode finally ended 2 hours later, most of which was spent with families, audience members, and crew sharing their own stories of loss, faith, and unexpected hope, Steve Harvey stood at center stage and delivered a closing statement that would be quoted in churches, shared on social media, and remembered for years to come. "Life is fragile," Steve said, looking directly into the camera. "We think we have control. We make plans, we follow the rules, we trust the science, and all of that is good. But sometimes God reminds us that He's still in charge, that His plans are bigger than ours, that when we've exhausted every option, He's just getting started." He paused, letting the words sink in. Isabella Rodriguez was dead. That's not my opinion. That's medical fact. Her heart stopped. Her brain was deprived of oxygen for 11 minutes. Every expert said she was gone. But her mother prayed, her family prayed, and somewhere in the space between impossible and miracle, God said, "Not today." Steve's voice grew stronger. So if you're watching this right now, and you're in a situation that feels hopeless, if the doctors have given you bad news, if you've lost something precious and you don't think you can go on, if you're standing at the edge of giving up, remember Isabella. Remember that sometimes the darkest moment is right before the dawn. Remember that your story isn't over until God says it's over. The episode aired 3 weeks later on November 9th, 2023. Within 6 hours, it had been viewed over 200 million times across all platforms. It became the most watched Family Feud episode in history, surpassing even the most viral funny moments. But the numbers don't tell the real story. The real story is in the 47,000 emails the show received from families sharing their own miracle stories. The real story is in the donations that poured into children's hospitals across America, totaling over $8 million in Isabella's name. The real story is in the doctors and nurses who watched the episode and felt renewed purpose in their calling. The real story is in the mothers who'd lost children and found comfort, knowing they weren't alone in their grief. Dr. Sarah Chen, the physician who'd pronounced Isabella dead, watched the episode at home with her family. She later gave an interview where she said, "I've been a pediatric emergency physician for 15 years. I've seen things I can't explain, but Isabella Rodriguez is the case that changed me. Medical science has its limits. I'll never again tell a parent there's absolutely no hope, because I was wrong, and I'm grateful to be wrong. Maya Rodriguez became an accidental spokesperson for infant health awareness and SIDS prevention. She started a foundation called 11 Minutes of Grace that provides support for families who've lost children and funds research into sudden cardiac events in infants. Within a year, the foundation had raised $3 million and helped over 500 families navigate their darkest moments. Steve Harvey brought Maya and Isabella back to Family Feud on the one-year anniversary of their first appearance. Isabella, now 18 months old, was walking, babbling, and showing no signs of any developmental issues whatsoever. Doctors from Johns Hopkins, Mayo Clinic, and Stanford had all examined her case. Their conclusion? Medically inexplicable full recovery. During that anniversary episode, Steve sat with Maya again, this time in chairs since Isabella was too active to sit still on the floor, and asked her a question that millions had been wondering. Maya, has this changed how you see life? Maya, more confident now, smiled. Every single day is a gift I thought I'd never have. I don't take anything for granted. Not her first words, not her first steps, not even the 3 a.m. crying sessions. Because I remember the silence. I remember what it felt like when she wasn't crying, wasn't moving, wasn't breathing. So yes, it changed everything. And your faith? Steve asked. My faith isn't based on whether God gives me what I want anymore, Maya said thoughtfully. It's based on knowing that even in my absolute worst moment, holding my dead baby, He was there. He didn't promise it would be easy. He promised He'd be with me, and He kept that promise. Steve nodded, tears in his eyes again. That's the testimony. The anniversary special ended with home video footage of Isabella's first birthday party, a celebration that her parents once thought they'd never get to plan. The video showed Isabella smashing into a cake shaped like a heart, surrounded by family, laughing that pure, uninhibited baby laugh that sounds like joy in its purest form. The final shot was Steve Harvey sitting alone on the Family Feud stage after everyone had left, the lights dimmed, just thinking. In voiceover, he said, "People ask me all the time why I still do this show after all these years. They ask if it gets boring, if it feels repetitive. And before October 19th, 2023, I would have given them my standard answer about loving to make people laugh. But now I know the real reason I'm here. It's for moments like this, moments when the game stops mattering and the humanity starts. Moments when a young mother gets to tell her story and give hope to millions. Moments when a miracle baby reminds us all that we're witnessing something bigger than television, bigger than entertainment, bigger than us. This is why I do what I do. Not for the laughs, though I love those. Not for the money, though I'm grateful. I do it for the chance, just maybe, to be present when God decides to show off a little bit. And on October 19th, 2023, He showed off in a big way. The screen faded to black, then showed one final message. Isabella Rodriguez is now a healthy, thriving toddler. Her story has inspired medical research into infant resuscitation and given hope to thousands of families facing similar crises. If you or someone you know has lost an infant, please reach out to 11 Minutes of Grace Foundation. You are not alone. The episode won a Peabody Award, an Emmy for Outstanding Achievement in Social Impact, and a special commendation from the American Academy of Pediatrics for raising awareness about infant cardiac events. But more importantly, it won something that can't be measured in awards or ratings. It won hearts. It reminded a cynical world that miracles still happen. It reminded grieving parents that their stories matter. It reminded medical professionals that they're part of something sacred. And it reminded everyone who watched that sometimes the most powerful thing television can do is simply show the truth, that life is precious, fragile, and occasionally, against all odds, resilient beyond measure. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to believe in miracles today. Hit that subscribe button if you want more stories that remind us why humanity is worth celebrating. Drop a comment below and tell us, have you ever witnessed something that science couldn't explain? Have you experienced a moment when hope defied logic? Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear. Because Isabella Rodriguez's story isn't just about one baby who survived the impossible. It's about all of us learning that the impossible is just God's invitation to witness something extraordinary. And sometimes that witness happens on a game show stage in Atlanta, Georgia, when a mother says she died in my arms and came back, and the whole world stops to listen. That's not just television. That's testimony. That's not just a moment. That's a miracle. And that's not just a story. That's proof that sometimes, when everything falls apart, grace is waiting to put it back together in ways we never imagined possible.